Ubisoft is not really the pinnacle of risk. I genuinely enjoy some of the work that Ubisoft does, but they aren't really breaking down boundaries by any stretch. In fact, if I had to craft an analogy here, I would say that Ubisoft is the mild-mannered and timid neighbor who comes over once a week and no one even remembers he was there because his biggest goal was not to stand out in a bad way and continue to be the same exact person that you had met and liked, to be fair, the first few times. Today, I want to discuss the idea of reducing a game's scale and scope to avoid criticism, and just how strange that is when considering the surrounding context. But before getting to that, since YouTube has now taken enormous bite-sized chunks out of my ability to sustain the channel, it's time for a sponsor. This video is brought to you by Black Desert Online Remastered. Black Desert is a pretty well-known game, to say the very least. In a world that is honestly oversaturated with MMOs, Black Desert stands out in a variety of different ways. The character creation is pretty much legendary in the industry. The graphics are on par with, or superior to, almost any other title you will see in the space, and certainly above and beyond most other MMO titles. The emphasis on real-time action combat takes a step back from the tried and true tab targeting method that has become common over recent years in a very refreshing way. The scope of this MMO is enormous. Economy features, skilling, crafting, intense PvP, and a whole bunch more I'm just not yet familiar with because of the sheer size, a fact that ties in nicely with this video's subject matter, but more on that later on. The game gets constant cyclical updates, both large and small, a large open world, and really it's a title that could have its own 30-minute review without any trouble at all, so condensing it here is somewhat difficult to do. Bottom line, after checking out the game thoroughly and understanding their one-time payment principle, as in you buy the game, then all content and all updates from there on out are yours to play with no additional charges, I am honored to have Black Desert sponsor the channel and this video. You can use the link down below to download the game. New players get 7 days free and returning players get a welcome gift in their account. Thank you again for the support of this channel. Back on task. Recently, IGN came out with a very short article that basically acknowledged a statement by Ubisoft towards the development intentions of Assassin's Creed Valhalla. The sentiment was fairly simple. Ubisoft will make the game smaller and shorter on purpose to address criticism of their previous title, Odyssey. The wording here matters a great deal, and unless misrepresented by IGN, which wouldn't be the first time, it is impactful because rather than saying the game might be shorter as we focus on more key components of the title, such as narrative or world density, the wording was, it won't be the longest or biggest game in the series. They addressed criticism on this one, which is a reactionary sentiment that hinges on responding to fan backlash that said the game is too long and too big. This honestly makes no sense to me. I hate to be that guy, but the Iliad and the Odyssey are Greek epics which span untold continents over a 7-year period or longer, in well over 1,000 pages of text, give or take, depending on which printed version you read, and the word Odyssey is defined as a long wandering voyage, or an intellectual and spiritual wandering quest. Not to make this video entirely about grammar, but the word wander is not a synonym for small, densely packed world. It is meant to convey a sense of wide open potential. Assassin's Creed Odyssey is very well crafted when considering its title. I played the game and enjoyed a great deal of the content. Yes, there was travel time, yes, it was a massive open space, but the industry has been striving for greater and greater open world sandboxes for decades. So witnessing a shift in response that quite literally begins to criticize a project for living up to its goals, title, and aspirations to the very letter, that's kind of strange to me. To go further, this is a tweet from Ubisoft Montreal, which claims that 14 co-dev studios, a total of 15 when considering the main studio themselves, collaborated to bring you the reveal of Valhalla. I'm not entirely sure if this just means that 15, yes, 15 different development studios across the world all collaborated on just the reveal cinematic, or if it means that the actual game itself was what brought them all together, but I have a very hard time believing that a cinematic needs 15 different studios, and I'm fairly certain this refers to the actual scope of the game itself. If that's true, and 15 studios have worked on or are actively working on this title, the intentional act of subtracting world size and length to avoid what really cannot have been a majority of players complaining about game size, it creates nothing but confusion because size and quality are in no way directly linked to one another. At least, they don't have to be. Again, the language here is what's important. This does not seem to be a commitment to narrative and gameplay quality such that it supersedes world size or campaign length. This seems to be a simple and direct response to a minority of critics that said, the world is too big, there is too much stuff, make it smaller, I don't want to play too long. And that is just baffling. The IGN article also goes on to say, oftentimes the payoff of a major character reveal was dulled because I had to spend 6 hours chasing my tail through half the Greek world to reach it. I've played Odyssey personally, and I have no idea what this reviewer was doing to run in circles for 6 hours before reaching a destination, unless they lied. Again, wouldn't be the first time. If they are talking about a half a dozen main quests and objectives that merely they just didn't like, yeah, that's about a tenth of the entire game, and you didn't enjoy it, so you can equate it to chasing your tail, fine, but any insinuation of 6-hour content gaps in between impactful moments, battles, reveals, or encounters is just dishonest, unless you are simply AFK. To once again clarify, I will never complain about toning down ambition in favor of a more well-rounded open-world experience or an increase in narrative or system quality. Polish. Generally speaking, if you're polishing the game, toning down the ambition is not a bad thing. That's probably a goal many titles would do well to emulate in the future, but for Assassin's Creed Valhalla, fresh off the heels of Odyssey, it doesn't feel, at least to me, like that was necessary to do. And even further, it does not even feel like this is what has taken place. It feels more like a knee-jerk reaction to a smaller subset of complaints which run in direct contradiction to one of the driving principles behind open-world games since the industry began. To be fair, the 4-part region of England and the single section of Norway sound like a pretty large game world to begin with, and I'm not saying by default as a result of this reaction to fan criticism that the game will somehow be terrible. However, the basic principle is what has landed me squarely in the position of absolute confusion, because in all the world of potential criticism, too big by itself does not make sense. There are examples of what this could mean. A game like Greedfall is perfect for this because the 30-hour, somewhat, maybe it's a little more or less than 30 hours, but the 30-hour campaign felt like it should have been, at best, 15 hours. All the assets are reused. Every palace you go into, exactly the same. Almost every townhouse interior is exactly the same. And it's very clear that the developers took a section of polished content and then stretched it far too much across a desired campaign length, which absolutely crippled the experience. Not all people feel this way. Some outlets reviewed the game as a 9 out of 10 or something, but at the very least it serves as an example of where content was noticeably stretched, even if you don't feel it's subtracted from the overall experience because of that. The thing is, Ubisoft is not really guilty of this. You can say the world is bland, you can say there isn't enough to do, but they simply do not lack the resources to craft a uniquely constructed world from start to finish, without stretching content in a noticeable way. The Division 2, whatever your current impressions of the game may be, that's kind of irrelevant here, had a development team of over 1,000 people. And when applying the same treatment to Assassin's Creed Valhalla, which is one of Ubisoft's flagship franchises, and has been for many years, it becomes hard to picture a world in which they do not award any and all resources necessary to the project. With this kind of weight backing up the game, committing to a smaller scope just to pacify critics, if that is indeed what is taking place here, it's one of the most baffling moves I have seen from Ubisoft as a company in history. Again, naturally arriving at a finished narrative which falls behind Odyssey in terms of raw story hours, that's nothing to blink twice at. But committing to that goal and saying that this is a direct response to criticism, which they have done, well in advance of the game's ultimate release, that's confusing. On a somewhat unrelated note, the gameplay trailer for Assassin's Creed Valhalla was recently revealed, and this rubbed me the wrong way. The trailer is quite deliberately and precisely called a gameplay trailer, but it is not in fact gameplay, and very clearly states in the first couple of frames that this is an estimated approximation of Xbox One Series X gameplay which does not yet exist. And thus, labeling this in such a way is dishonest at best, downright manipulative at worst. It's too early to conclusively judge the game, obviously, but committing to a smaller scope when previous titles from Ubisoft have been sequentially building in scale and ambition, though perhaps not raw innovation, for years, it seems strange. It might not go terribly, and could easily be a positive step if the true motivation is more akin to additional depth and polish on a more confined narrative, instead of a response to criticism. However, I can't help but get the feeling that we as players are starting to have wholly unreasonable feedback. If a game is too small versus what was expected, it gets roasted. Rightly so. If it's not polished, if it's buggy, glitchy, and unfinished, again, rightly, it gets roasted. But now if it's too big, if it's too large, while living up to the mythical definition of its own title almost perfectly, it gets roasted? Again, even when that is the case, and the result is that the development company reduces the size and scope of its next open world project, when open worlds typically hinge on the scale of their potential to advance the genre. That is not as straightforward and makes me wonder how well we as players have been constructing our feedback. Combine all this with a gameplay trailer that's just a choppy minute-and-a-half cinematic of rendered engine footage, and it puts a pretty big dampener on my expectations for Assassin's Creed Valhalla. Conceptually, it's still something I am looking forward to, but I'll admit that my anticipation has dropped substantially. This might not be true for others, and it might be completely misplaced, who knows, but given the way that gaming has been shaped by player expectations for so long, and how radically those expectations seem to have shifted in such a short time with one single franchise, I thought it was worth exploring the topic and acknowledging that the speculative logic and condition of Assassin's Creed Valhalla is confusing under the best of circumstances as of right now. That's it though. There are links down below, merch, Patreon, Twitter, etc. Another gaming YouTuber to support as well, but I'll cut it there and stop rambling. As always, thank you all for watching, and have a nice night.